All right, welcome everybody to episode 23 of the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. We broadcast every Thursday afternoon. Today at 4 o'clock, we are typically at 3 o'clock every Thursday. We want to welcome everybody who has been joining us over the course of the last minute or two. We broadcast live to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. And for those of you who have registered, we want to welcome you into the virtual roundtable via Zoom. For those of you who have registered and are in the Zoom room, feel free to interact with us throughout by posting your questions or your comments in the chat box. I'll go ahead and drop a quick comment in the chat box to get your comments going. And we also want to welcome our LinkedIn community. We know a lot of people tune in via LinkedIn, whether that's just pausing as you're scrolling through the feed or tuning in via the live stream. We want to thank our LinkedIn community for being such a big part of Navigating Now on a week-to-week basis. We are 23 weeks into our Navigating Now Roundtable series, and it keeps getting better. You know, we continue to bring great topics and the best leaders to the table, those topics that matter to us, those topics that are most relevant today. And we bring great leaders like today's guest to the table to help us unpack. Today we have Chris Oltmans. He is the VP of Clinical and Branch Operations at Health Resource Solutions. Chris is also an incredible member of our Navigating Now community. I believe he was on episode 2. He has been a really strong voice in the community here in the Midwest, particularly in Omaha, as well as here in Chicago. Chris is a leader. He is an organizer of people. And today we're going to be talking about the new service-driven orientation. For those of you who know Chris Oltmans, you know that he has spent his entire career in service of his coworkers, his employees, and most recently, his patients, those patients that are a part of HRS. And that service orientation has really shined over the course of the last 6 to 8 months as Chris has led HRS through the pandemic, ensuring continuity of care for their patients, ensuring efficiency and continuity of business operations, and most importantly, keeping his people healthy and happy. So Chris, we can't wait to unpack this topic, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm humbled. That was an amazing lead. I'm really happy to be on the 23rd episode. So, you know, a little honor of MJ, and there's a lot of great I have to slay LeBron too after his big win, but I saw 20 get the invite for 23. And I'm like, yes, that's a good
number. It's a strong number.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So so as I mentioned, you know, Chris is a part of the Thought Team community, but he really has been on the front lines of you know, what's going on today in healthcare. You know, we Thought Team work with a lot of life sciences organizations, particularly on the commercial side. And we work with groups of professionals that are in service of ultimately patients out there, whether that be through life sciences, biotech, health tech, pharma. Chris is a classically trained physical therapist. He is now a business leader in the home health and PT space. And he is about a degree or two even closer to what we all are in service of right now, which is the patient. And we want to talk a little bit about that today, and particularly how he applies his service mentality to his day-to-day and his business strategy. So before we get in, Chris, let's catch up. You know, I love bringing people back to the table, particularly leaders like yourselves who, you know, have been with us over the course of the last 23 weeks, but have also seen a lot of the change and have been navigating a lot of the change. So excited to hear what is new with you, what's new with HRS. How are you doing?
I was thinking about that all week, you know, getting ready for this, just how much has happened. I mean, you know, the pandemic, you know, just how much has happened in the world since we caught up last time. I mean, my goodness, I think it's been right around 6 months since we spoke. It feels like it could have been a couple of years with the amount of things that have happened in the world. So yeah, I first wanted to say, you know, again, we still are going through this pandemic. I wanted to stop and say thank you to all of the first responders that do what they do every day. There's still a ton of risk out there in taking care of patients and, doing what we all love every day in the healthcare community. So I wanted to say thank you first to them as well. And then, also sincere thank you to you, Norm, and your team at Thotium. You guys embarked on this, and this was new to you guys in March and April. And I really mean it. You guys have stayed so consistent. The people and the people, just the quality of the folks that you've brought on, I've listened and I've really taken a lot of the little pieces of the best of what they had to offer. But sincerely, thank you to you and Norm for thinking outside the box and doing what you've done. I mean it.
We really appreciate it. I look back to 21, 22 weeks ago when you first joined, and you were on with a host of other Navigating Now guests, some of which who have already been back. I remember you were on the episode with Nick Rodriguez, who's a local gym owner here, who's growing more than just a physical space, but now a virtual and digital brand in kind of the post-pandemic world. You were on with a few of our clients as well too, talking about just how healthcare is evolving and how those organizations that are really putting pen to paper and making moves are able to do some really big things, not just for their business, but for patient care. And so much has happened in the last 22 or 23 weeks. So I'm also really curious as to kind of tell us first a little bit about HRS, the work that you do, because I know we didn't get a real chance to kind of unpack that on episode 2. So let's really focus on your business, HRS. What do you do, and particularly what are you seeing on the front lines as you're out there? I know you're kind of managing teams of people who are seeing patients, but clearly you're getting a lot of feedback in terms of the way they're interacting with patients and how patients are kind of working their way through these times.
Yeah, so HRS is a skilled home healthcare provider. So founded by a couple gentlemen based out of Chicago about 15 years ago. We specialize in the care of really highly acute patients. So, cancer, infusion, wound care, really difficult stuff. And we see patients in their home setting. So we send nurses, PTs, OTs, et cetera, into the home to take care of these folks. And we offer services in Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa, and most newly in Michigan. And we take care every day of about 1,600 patients. We have 150 clinicians and then about 150 split up between support, sales, all of that. So what's really interesting is when we talked the first time, we were deploying new strategies and new ways to navigate the COVID space as we started to understand that we were going to lose clinicians that had to be quarantined. We were going to lose clinicians that were scared to provide care inside the home. So what's really changed is making patients feel safe and making our people feel safe as we try to provide care in the home. So just something that was a really big change for us was just getting protective equipment, right? So PPE. Mm-hmm. So the amount of investment that we had to make and we needed to make so that our clinicians felt safe, it's probably one of the things I'm most proud of. Domestic supply. So domestic supply almost completely went away. So the acute hospitals, so, in Chicago, Northwestern, Rush, University of Chicago, the Advocate system, to put it in context, they chewed up almost all of the protective equipment because the domestic supply, so much of it was dependent on coming over from China. All of that went away. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden you have these clinicians that have to take care of these thousands upon thousands of growing patients that need care. Mm-hmm. And you can't keep them safe. So we had to get very creative, internationally ordering our protective equipment for our employees. And I'm proud to say that, out of 150 employees, we had 3 test positive for COVID to date. And that's a pretty outstanding number in that in a given month, we'll do 13,000 visits nationwide. So for that many clinicians to knock out that many visits and to be out in the community every day in a non-controlled space It's pretty incredible on what we've achieved and what we've done. And we'll get into it later. We'll get into it later too, taking action. And so not just talking about what's going to happen, but actually planning out the worst case scenario, but then actually building the construct to go do that worst case scenario, investment, people, whatever that takes.
Yeah. So I love that, just as kind of setting the stage for our topic today, which is how do we maintain or even enhance our service orientation? And we'll define that here in a moment. But I have a couple follow-up questions just based on kind of the state of the union, right, that you just gave, and the process that you had to go through in ensuring that your employees were stood up, they were able to go out safely to in the current environment, manage patients, PPE, all of that, test your employees, make sure that they continue to get tested and are continually out there safely. What was there a moment where you almost had to ask your employees to enroll in this, because it's a completely different environment, right, where kind of their health is at risk, and that might shift things for folks? Like, was that kind of an unsaid ask of your folks, or was there a point where you had to communicate out to your folks, like, look, this is where we're headed and we need you on board, but we understand if you're not?
I've got to compliment you again. You're getting really good at this. Like, that's an amazingly good question. One thing we have a town hall now every week as a company, and we'd never done that. And that's exactly what the town hall was to distribute information in one space at one time, to let our clinicians and our entire company know, what's going on in the company, because our communication that was so people-based and so brick and mortar based was gone, right? Mm-hmm. So now the town hall was put in place. It's every single Thursday, 8:30, this information goes out. These are the CDC guidelines. This is how we're going to keep you safe. This is, the appreciation of what they do, to your point. Like, we had to, like, almost say you said, recruit and just continuing to promote people to go out, and what you're doing is an amazing thing. And that we are so energized by what you do every day, but then also they can give us that feedback through the town hall of what we need to provide to them. What are we missing in terms of PPE distribution, supply chain, et cetera? So that's literally, that's such a great question, because we'd never done a town hall in the company's history. We'd always communicated kind of locally, branch by branch. And so now we have this corporate distribution of information where, all 300 people that we employ, whether they can do it live or they can come back later, they can be in tune with what we're doing. Yeah,
no, I love that. Naturally I want to go to, like, okay, so let's unpack service orientation, but me, I'm going to bounce around a little bit.
Sure.
When I think of service oriented leaders, I think of people, that I've been affiliated with, or people in my life that take a service stance regardless of whether they're in role or not.
Yeah.
And the way that I know you, Chris, first and foremost, is you're a really good friend of mine, and our friendship, I think is really has a foundation of being in service to each other. We've been able to show up in each other's lives at very pivotal moments. We've been able to open up to each other as friends, as colleagues at time, and as professionals, right? Some of the biggest decisions I've made as a professional have been with you at the table. And it's because you've taken that open stance. You've taken that stance of, I'm here to support, I'm here to chip in. I want to almost go back to your upbringing, because we're going to get to what I think makes you really, really effective as a leader, which is you have this very natural service orientation. Where do you think that came from?
My mom being a secretary for over 30 years in the public education space. So I watched my mom, be everybody that walked into this high school in Omaha, Nebraska, she was the first person they spoke to. And so whether I was 6 years old and I was playing on the floor next to her in the summer when she was there, I think from a really young age, that's the fabric, customer service and genuine customer service that my mom was so concerned that that person right away, that what was the ask and what can I do to fulfill it? And I think even now my wife would say, like, sometimes the stuff that I do to make sure that people are happy, she's like, you're nuts. Like, what do you do? But
Yeah.
there is just this genuine thing that being brought up with an educator in the education space, and especially like a secretary, it's like the foremost of customer service, right? It's the face of that building. I think that's where it really started from. And also, you know, our conversations as friends, I'm also not afraid to tell you exactly what is on my mind. There's no holding back, right?
Yeah.
So when I'm making mistakes, when I'm not at my best, you can be forthright and honest with me. And it's the same thing, me with you, with decisions that you wanted to make, and I challenged you on those. Our friendship was so strong that I think I carry that into business too, that the relational side of business, which this time is really challenging, right? I'm used to a handshake and sitting down for an hour and meeting people and then knowing their kids' names, and generally, like, this isn't transactional for me. It's a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I get my roots at, though, is that I watched my mom just grow this network. The postman would get a Christmas card from us that delivered mail to Millard South. The UPS gentleman, like, you know, my mom always said too, you know, you treat every person in the building the exact same, and, you know, indifferent of what their role is in the building. So I think, like, sometimes it can come off almost corny when I'm, you know, I want to know this person's name. You've had dinner with me. Every single person that I meet at dinner, I ask their name. What's your name? Because if I go back there again, I want to know who they are and that I care about them and that I appreciate them. And that's that's kind of the fabric that I've been brought up with.
Yeah. So I love that example. And I had a feeling you were going to go to your mom. I've met your mom, and she is also just a perfect example of, you know, service, leading with service, right? I've had her meals, you know, I've stayed at her house. It's pretty incredible. You and I have a term for that. And we call that, I know you'll laugh if I kind of make this reference. We call that the to the moon syndrome, right? And sometimes we say it's a syndrome. Sometimes we say it's a syndrome where, you know, you and I have caught ourselves in certain situations, whether that's, you know, in a meeting with our friends or at a gathering, like a social gathering. We've caught ourselves expending 101% of our energy, making sure that either everybody, or a lot of times in your case, it's a single person. You spend 101% of your time, and I've seen you do this. We've been in a room of 50 plus people, and I have seen you spend 4 to 4.5 hours of a social gathering, expending 101% of your time ensuring that one person has the night of their lives, that has the best possible experience that they could have. And it's not the most important person in the room often. So let's talk about that a little bit, because you and I have referenced that. I don't know if we've ever really tied it back to, you know, the way that we do business.
Let's tie back to business, right? So I think that's you know, one of the coolest things is walking into a conference room, right? Or walking into a virtual room and everybody's focused at the VP, or they're focused at what's so interesting in business. If we all think about it, the decision maker, the person that's going to send you that first referral, or they're going to test your services the first time, it's not the executive. It's not the VP. Yeah. It's somebody at a different level. And so many times in business, the mistake that is made is everybody's just over here focused on that VP or that leader. And, you know, it's not that person. And so I think, to your point, I want to know everybody in the room, and that's in the organization as well. You know, one thing that I've implemented now, so we have 150 clinicians in the organization. One thing I've challenged myself now, I'm starting with nurses, is every day I'm going to talk to one of our nurses. So every day I'm going to reach out to one of my nurses, and I'm going to ask them, what can we do better as an organization? So that goes back, right? And that's one thing that I challenge anybody in business is care about everybody that's in the room. And and I also think that goes back to, you know, being passionate about what we do, right? So I love healthcare. You know, I will talk to you for an hour over it. You're like, can we talk about something else? I love it. And so I want people, the entire room, I want the entire room to understand why we're better, what we do, and why our patients, you know, why our clinicians are just like me. They all have the biggest hearts and they take care of the most difficult patients, but that relates to business as well. As so a room of 400 people that we're at, right? A huge party, right? There might be one person there that I've never met. And just by nature, that's who,
yeah.
You know, I do think that's challenging though too, is to balance those relationships and make sure that you know how and when to water each one of those plants so that those relationships don't go away.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to get into that, and we're going to get into that because, you know, I called it the to the moon syndrome, because there is another side to taking that mentality, right? So I want to get into that in a second, but I also want to just touch on and acknowledge, you know, because I think folks who are tuning in, you know, can really relate to when we're able to call on, you know, our past or our childhood, or really specific moments in our childhood that make us who we are today.
Yeah.
And for you, you know, the Chris Oltmans that I have experienced in both my personal life and my professional life has had such a service orientation, has had such a, you know, we're going to bring you to the moon and back type mentality, which is so just absolutely infectious, right? It's incredible. You know, we all want to be around it. It's because there were certain points, and you just referenced a very specific point where you're looking through an office window at your mom, you know, 25 years ago, doing the same thing to a group of secretaries and educators in completely different industries doing completely different things. And, ironically, like I have a very specific image as well too. My mother was an educator as well too. She, if your mother was the service queen, you know, my mom was the experience queen, like the environment queen. I mean, she could set the mood or an event or an experience so beautifully and so intentionally. And I was the product of that. And that is why I do the work that I love to do today in creating, designing, and delivering experiences for people, whether it's our clients, whether it's my coworkers, whether it's my friends, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's very specific moments. You know, my mother used to have her teacher friends over, you know, a couple of weeks before Christmas, and she would do these cookie exchanges. And I remember standing in the middle of the house when she'd have these gatherings. And I was at the center of this experience that she had created. And, you know, there were different zones in the house. There was, you know, dancing and laughing downstairs. There was intimate conversations upstairs. You know, there was almost like exchange or commerce kind of in the family room. And I didn't know it at the time, but, you know, that was almost seeping into my DNA in terms of the orientation that I take in ensuring that, you know, everything is an incredible experience. And I think that's, you know, essentially what you just unpacked for us and why you do the work that you do today. And it's, you know, as we get older, and I keep saying that, I'm saying that more and more, we do, like, it becomes a lot clearer that we are who we came from. Yeah. And in so many ways, we are those moments where we didn't know it at the time, but we were staring directly into what is ingrained in us through our parents. And I know you've got, you know, 3 beautiful daughters, and it's incredible to know that they're seeing that in you. And I've seen them actually see that in you, whether that be, you know, you in service of your friends or your customers. So, you know, it's funny, Navigating Now always goes back. For some reason, we always go back to childhood. I like, no matter what topic we're on, no matter what guest is at the table, you know, you always go back. There's a theory in design thinking when you're interviewing folks. If you ask somebody why 3 or more times, they will get to at some point in their childhood, and they might be in tears, right? Like if you just keep asking somebody why you're doing something, it will ultimately tie back to the environment that you grew up in. So I want to acknowledge that. It's such a really interesting theme in all of these discussions. So today is about the service-oriented organization. And you've already talked about some of the ways that, you've navigated over the course of the last, 6 to 8 months. Tell us about, and maybe I can kick the discussion off. I feel like, we work with a lot of sales organizations. And if, 15 years ago, the selling model was features and benefits, it was stomping the competition, it was frequency and reach. How many times can you get to your customer, and how broadly can you reach with your message? How many times can you remind your customer? I feel like today, and particularly over the last 8 months, we have very quickly gone to a place where we're not just talking about customer service and having a service orientation. It is the new sales model in our case, and we're starting to really embed it in formal sales processes and sales training. And I'm just wondering, how has this service orientation in an organization like yours that has always had a focus on service, how has that evolved over the course of the last 6 to 8 months, and where do you see it going with HRS?
Yeah. So I love, what was the terms that you used 15 years ago? What sales was? You said it was
reach and frequency.
Right. So
yeah,
which is cold, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just, how many times can I hit the target until, I finally get where now I feel like we become much more relational in the way that we sell. And I think that's service, right? So service might, everybody sees like someone doing something, and that's a service, like you're taking a tool and you're applying it, right? Mm-hmm. Where now I feel like we're training a lot of our sales folks within our company, but also our clinicians, get to know who you're either taking care of or who you're selling to, and know what they're about, know their family. It's not enough to just close the deal, know these people. And I think that's how we pivoted, Anthony. So we were so used to walking in with lunches and presenting and this and that, all gone, right? So now,
right,
increased events outside of work, where usually that wasn't really indicative in sales, but now it's like, hey, can we go do something outside of work? Because I literally can't come in and tell you my value prop inside of work. So I think a lot of our TCCs now are hanging out outside of work. My sales manager in Chicago frequently is inviting people over in a safe fashion over to his rooftop in Chicago so that he can get to know these people and create relationships. And it's been really, really powerful. And then to your point too, clinicians by trade, bedside manner is not necessarily something they teach us in school, right? It's all flashcards. Do you know the muscles? Do you know the tendons? Do you know the ligaments? Do you know the medication, etc.? And I think we're at a really, really important time where bedside manner is so important, and it goes way beyond what I walked into the home to do in terms of your medications and your care, but also emotionally and personally getting to know those people. So I think, and that's easy for me, right? Like the markets kind of come to me because I would rather sell in a relational fashion versus a transactional fashion. Yep. But I think for HRS, it's become much more relational in terms of how we care for our patients and we sell to our potential referral sources.
Mm-hmm. I almost want to get like real tactical, real specific, because without knowing your business model, it's interesting to hear even just some of the anecdotal stories where like service has shown up in a major way, and I'm just curious, like maybe a story or two where, either you or one of your employees, one of your clinicians has gone just completely, out of their way, whether it's through the pandemic or not, where like maybe it wasn't heard or felt, it wasn't part of the reach and frequency of the business model, but it made a huge impact.
Gotcha. So I was in Chicago, just back in Nebraska today, but I was in Illinois the last 3 days. Had a patient who called and basically has, let's just say he has a really, really bad wound, right? His
Yep.
insurance would not cover the supplies that he needs inside his home, and that his sister is taking care of him. And Anthony, when I say bad, like really, really like bad wound, I mean, it's horrible what this guy's going through. Literally could not get the supplies because his insurance was not giving the authorization for him to get the supplies. I happened to be at the office, went over with our education director, boxed up 2-week supply of gauze, saline, everything else that I could get, and took this directly to his brother's home because his sister had him at radiation yesterday. So I took it directly to his brother's home, handed it off. This will get you through 2 weeks. And I haven't had to do that a ton, but it's, it happened yesterday. It happened yesterday that we had a decision to make. And the only other option for this patient was to go back to the hospital. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's an example of it, Anthony, but I also think, you've been blessed. You guys have built an amazing thing at Thoughtium. I'm so proud of the work that we've done and that I've done it at HRS, but it's those hits that I think if people keep their eyes open to it, they're there every day. They're there every day. And I think a lot of people pass up those opportunities, whether it's personal or it's in work, that, those little touches can propel you so far in your career, your profession. So yeah, that's an example literally just yesterday. And I don't take much credit for that. My team and they're doing it every day, something like that.
No, I love that. And, you talk about the, ROI of, maintaining a service stance or customer service. And there's now, there's data that is backing, the investment in taking more of a service orientation. And when I say that, I mean shifting more of your energy, even your recruiting practices, to bring people in that have, the competencies that support a service orientation. And those competencies are, deep self-awareness, understanding, your own emotions, and how you might react in a given situation. Maintaining an other orientation, so understanding how to read when somebody needs help, or how to read when somebody might need to be communicated in a certain way. And then the third real component to the service orientation is really situational. So how do you pivot and react in a moment where you can capitalize on helping somebody out, or you can capitalize on a service approach. For example, yesterday, that wasn't the situation that you were in that allowed you to reach out and help a patient. It wasn't given to you in a brief. It wasn't in a CRM system. It might not even have really gone through and processed through your ears and your brain had you not had an other orientation and a deep sense of your own self and how you just emotionally want to be there for other people. And the data is suggesting that the more that you take this service orientation, in fact, there was a study that was done, it was written in the book Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman, a really, really good book for anybody who's interested, that says that for every 1% improvement in the service climate that you're creating for your customers, there's a 2% increase in revenue. So we can now tie service orientation directly back to ROI, which makes things really interesting when you have folks for decades who have been touting customer service as either they've been measuring it in very hard metrics, or they've been touting it in a hardcore sales environment as kind of a soft, almost tertiary component to the way that we interact with our customers. I love the fact that we can tie it to ROI now.
I love the fact for years that primarily in sales, customer service that's my strongest set, right? And I succeeded, and I had success in sales, and now we're having success in this. So I love the fact that, and I'm glad that HRS is benefiting from that. And Anthony, the amount of people that we've hired, in the last year, it's incredible. We've almost doubled our clinical staff, And the way that we have sold, because the sales engine, the last 3 years has been built upon what my vision was. I've hired people, to your point, that are just directed on service. And so then if you can tie together the quantitative side of sales, so the amount of calls equals the amount of referrals, but right here, it's service centric first, right? So it's service centric first. I care about the patient that you're entrusting me with. And that's what's cool, Anthony. The first patient that we ever got in Nebraska, her name, it's in a private place in the office. Her name is on a whiteboard in our office. It will never come down. And that caseworker from that hospital, last week, I still text her and I still thank her for giving us the trust, right?
Yeah.
And now 3 years later, we've serviced 1,200 people in Nebraska. So there's a case example where, it's not that, it's the person that gave me the trust, that gave me the ability to prove myself and my team that I love that now it's not, people can still think it's soft. It's an amazing advantage to organizations that tap into it.
Yeah, I love that. And just to round out, because I think we've talked a lot about kind of the what behind, the service-driven organization. We've talked a little bit about the how, or the why, I should say. I guess two-part question, and I can speak to this a little bit as well too. But for someone like yourself, Chris, who naturally takes a service orientation, what are some of the ways that you're able to maintain that on a day-to-day basis? Because I am sure there are days when you wake up and you're not as attuned to those signals as you were, just the other day when you felt like you just needed to get in your car with a bunch of equipment and drive out and deliver. Are there things that is there a mentality that you take, or things that you refer back to, or reminders that you give yourself to maintain the service orientation in a world where, it might be easier to cut corners or to focus on reach and frequency, or to look at the bottom of the spreadsheets?
Man, I definitely do. I mean, we all have our off days, right? We all have our days where, it's hard at home. I'll stop for a second. My girls, they were out of school for 3 months at home, and literally and so they were in first and pre-K last year, and they got pieces of paper that they would go home with, like a big bundle, like just this batch of paper, and that would get them through 30 days of schoolwork. So me and my wife, and I have to take pause and thank my amazing wife, like she puts up with me, and she stayed so calm through this. But and now we're still going through this homeschool. So those off days that I'm sure all of us are having, Anthony, the only thing that I come back to is I just legitimately care about people. Like I want to know someone. And it's funny, you meet people in life, they're like, I don't like people that much. And that's okay. You can be extremely successful in that route too. But what wins for me, what works for me is I genuinely want to know that person across the table that I want to do business with. And if they don't engage in that, that's fine. But I think it comes back to that. I am not the most A to B person. I'm not. But I know at the end, I inherently just want to know what that person needs in terms of a professional, need. Where can we meet, where the value is, what they need, and what I want to provide. But then also outside of work. And I'd even say some of the people that I've mentored, lately, like a young gentleman that started a telehealth firm through all this, his selling approach was, so much more related to the hits, right? The knocking on the door. And he was up against it. And come to find out, Anthony, that his background is extremely blue collar, extremely blue collar. He started telling this story to people that he was meeting for the first time, why am I doing this? And right back to what you said earlier, that if we look inherently, we have stories, we have background, we have our parents, we have friends, we have experiences that's what people engage with, whether you're trying to sell something or you're trying to provide care. that humanistically we can connect on that level. So I'm not on every day, but it's easy for me, and I know that, to be humanistic and to care about other people. But I'd also say, for folks that maybe don't have that natural thing inside of them, just listen to people and ask questions and just care.
Yeah.
And
the backbone of all of this is empathy. It's funny, we've gone this entire time without mentioning that word. And empathy is it's an action. It's also a skill. I will tell you, as a competitive athlete, as an entrepreneur, there are times where I don't see myself leading with empathy. And it's those times that I'm able to kind of check myself particularly, and I'm able to gauge, like, okay, what is my stance here? Is it a service-oriented stance? Am I here to help, right? Or am I here to accomplish a goal or to get something out of this? And so I agree. I think it's calling on past experiences, people that really do it well. And it's also just that deep empathy that you have, for everybody. And it's easier today to do that than ever, right? Because I think, as divided as we are, in terms of the way that we just purely connect with each other as humans and empathize, there's a foundational kind of empathetic component to every conversation that we're having today, which I think is going to be a really good byproduct of the pandemic, and ultimately will drive organizations to a more of a service driven organization, because it's no longer like a soft skill that I have to build. It's a cost of entry right now to building a business or operating a business, correct?
yes, and I think, like, let's get outside of healthcare for a minute. My in-laws are in the credit processing, and then also in the service industry, in the bar business, right? And I think you look around, so my eyes are kind of always looking at different marketplaces. I'm not just stuck on healthcare. And you watch the people that have adjusted, and what did they do? They listened, right? So they knew their service offering. They saw the tsunami coming at them. Okay, what boats do I need to build? If the biggest tsunami hits, which in a lot of cases it did, what boat do I need to build for that? Nothing's going to happen. I don't do anything. But I think you see people that have survived and have, I don't know if anyone's thrived during this time, but to your point, I think those of us that understand our customers and we have a service-oriented approach to everything, we've adjusted. Not every restaurant did curbside. Not every restaurant figured out how to, my favorite place to get tacos and a margarita in Omaha, dude, they figured this out in a week. And everything that they delivered at curbside tasted the exact same as if I was sitting at my table, right?
Yeah.
But 70% of restaurants in a given market, they didn't do that. And I think those of us, and you talk to the people I really respect in the different industries, the first thing out of their mouth, it isn't about their business, it's about how they're going to fit the need of their customers. So the value was never introspective, it was outward facing.
Yep.
Absolutely. Whether you're struggling right now or it's just it's an easy time, and it has been, to the world's up against me. But again, like Anthony, I think what's so powerful in each of us is that we have all these experiences, and we have this community around us. Ask more questions, whether it's your customer or your community, and there's a way to succeed. And I think it like, to your point, I'm so interested in the next 5-10 years, how businesses evolve, how people evolve from this.
I think what I'm hearing you say is like, if the backbone is empathy, the main tool is listening, right? That's the main tool that we use to empathize. And I'll give you a very real example. If you were to tell me, 8 months ago that I would have such a deep passion and desire to help local business owners in my 6 block by 6 block radius, I would have said, I great idea, but like, no, like I need to get clients and I need to grow my business, and they're the small business owners in the Fulton market in Chicago are doing just fine.
I love it.
But what the last 8 months has taught me, because I have physically been restrained to my hood, my local block, because I haven't been on a flight, and I've been walking back and forth, past these small businesses over the last, 8 months or so. I have tuned in to the small business community here in the West Loop, and it's been those conversations. It's been really listening. And you get a thing or two, and you're getting advice, but you're really listening to what these folks are going through, and that has allowed me to connect with the small business community in a way that we never thought we would be connecting to, frankly, 8 months ago. And I think it will fundamentally change not just our community, but the way that we do business. We're calling on small business skills and capabilities more than we ever have. We are more interested in helping out local entrepreneurs and small businesses than we ever are. And our ears and our eyes are wide open. And yes, we continue to say that there is a silver lining of what we're all going through, but a deep sense of empathy, the other orientation, and the service climate, or the service-driven organization now leading and differentiating in a way that can be measured via ROI. That's really exciting to me. And you can just feel it switching. You can feel that shift happening. We have a question that came through that I'm really glad somebody asked, because I was about to ask it myself. For someone like yourself, Chris, who has the natural service orientation, we talked on kind of how you can sharpen your own tools, and you call on your childhood experiences, and you remind yourself through empathy and listening what's most important. How do we embed this in our own organizations? How do we get, everybody into more of a service mentality?
Yeah. So whether you have a resource, that you can bring into the organization, maybe you're blessed to have that resource internally. We're huge believers in once a quarter, we have a book in the organization that the leaders, so this quarter we're doing this quarter we're doing this is our focus. But I think, like, to your point, Anthony, that you said, you're already retraining your sales training, your sales direction. So I think, however you as an organization, when it's the delivery of info, right? Like, how are you going, how are you going to deliver that info? Are you going to bring someone in from the outside that can speak that game, who has success, so you get buy-in in the organization? Are you going to read a book and then have an offsite meeting to discuss that and how we are going to be more service oriented? Or do you have an internal resource that you can rely on to spread that thing out? And we talk about that. We talk about that at HRS all the time. It's like, what is that thing? Well, I've been blessed enough and been trusted enough to take leadership of this organization. Guess what happens? It starts to go through the veins of the organization, and it's a really powerful thing to watch. And to your point as well, it's not qualitative at this point, it's quantitative in terms of its outcome. So I think as a leadership unit, at Thoughttium, like what you guys have done, but call me. I think that's the biggest thing too, Anthony. My LinkedIn page has my email, and that's the thing. People reach out to me personally all the time, that I'll talk to 15 minutes with anybody if you want to try to make your organization better, right? So, but I think you either bring someone in from the outside, you have a value brand, service-oriented person in-house, and it doesn't have to be a manager. It doesn't have to be an executive. It can be someone that is task-oriented every day, but they get it. They get it, and to have them speak. So I think there's multiple ways to get it done. As an organization, you got to find out the best way to spread it out.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this. You have to name it. Like you have to actually acknowledge the wins and the losses that have occurred due to the orientation that you're taking with your clients. And I'll give you a perfect example. We about 3 months ago spun up a workshop on situational intelligence, which really kind of unpacks and and workshops the three main components to taking a more of a service stance. That deep sense of self and self-awareness, that other orientation, and the ability to pivot and apply it in a real world scenario. And we spun this up based on a client request, but what we realized very quickly was that it was hitting our clients, particularly clients that had big sales organizations, at a time where people really needed this knowledge. They really needed to understand, their own emotions and how they were bringing them into kind of their new career and their new workplace, whether that's, managing homeschooling, as well as like being on Zoom, not being in the office. It brings up a lot of emotions in folks. And what we realized very quickly is that this offering, yes, it was current, it was differentiated, it had real impact, but at the end of the day, it was really in service of our clients in a way that maybe felt a little bit different than, reach and frequency and the typical sales training model. And we, as much as we'd love to think that was due to the great design or the implementation of the product, it wasn't. It was due to the fact that we stayed open and that we were in service of our clients. And being able to kind of name that within the organization and celebrate that, I think, is also a real unlock or perpetuator of the service orientation.
Can I ask what was the origination of that spin up though? Like what made you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to your point, it was a client that came to us and had an hour and a half conversation with us about a real problem that he was having in his organization of, people not being able to pivot in real time in customer conversations. And he couldn't put his finger on it. He didn't know what it was or the skills that they needed to build in it, but he was willing to share with us some of the gaps that existed and the trials and tribulations he was going through in trying to train his people. And so it was that conversation that wasn't very defined, but required a certain level of listening and empathy that allowed us to very quickly get to the heart of the real opportunity.
And how was what was your relationship? He opened up, right? Yeah. What was your relationship with that person? Like, do you know this person outside of work, or had you been in business together for a long time? Like that's the thing, like the opening up part, that's the juice. Like, he opened up. Go ahead. Like, no,
I mean, in this situation, it was a longtime client of ours, somebody deeply embedded in our community, somebody that really trusts, to come to us and say, hey, I've got a real, gap here, or I've got an opportunity. But I agree, it is a skill to open people up in a way that you can get to kind of the underlying, problem. For example, the patient that you talked about this week, I mean, at the end of the day, that could have been somebody who was unwilling to provide that information or share that he needed help or reach out to his brother who was reaching out to you. So again, and that just, that the unlock of that information and that connection, that relationship is maintaining an open stance. It's leading with empathy. It's asking high impact questions. All of those come together to create, kind of that service orientation. I love the fact that, we can sit here today in 2020 and have almost an hour-long conversation about entire business models that are run and stand on service, right? And I mean, like, we've been talking about commercial business models, not necessarily customer service business models, right?
Yeah.
So I love how this topic is not just a concept that we talk about, but it's something that we're absolutely putting into practice. And Chris, I know for every story that you gave us today, I know how humble you are. There's about 100 each day where you are reflecting and embodying the service mentality and the service approach. And I know it's benefited HRS, it's benefited the community that you're building. It's benefited your own professional network. And most importantly, it's benefited the people around you who love you so much. And I'm one of those. And I want to thank you for, everything that you do on a day-to-day basis, particularly out there in the field, enabling your people to provide care. You thank the first responders at the beginning of this episode. There are so many layers right now to healthcare, and so many unseen layers that make up, the patient experience. And I know that, you every day wake up to improve those different layers. And I want to thank you again for all the work that you do out there.
And the lead in was, I'm humbled by the lead in, and I really appreciate what you just said. And I appreciate our friendship. You and I have the ability to be really, really honest with one another, because we know that it's going to be taken in a loving way, right? And so we support each other. And I think, although like my relationships in business will never be as deep, I mean, you're one of my best friends in life, right? But I can have a very meaningful relationship with people that I want to do business with, and it's genuine. So I think if we can all find that when we're wanting to deliver our service or wanting to provide our product to someone, really stop and pause for a second, to your point, on the listening, and not just the business listening of it, but like, what are they going through outside of the walls? And one thing that I've trained all the sales folks on, you do not sell HRS fully inside the brick and mortar. You give the elevator pitch, right? This is what we do, right? High acute care, we're really timely, and you get a transitional coordinator, so customer satisfaction. You make the real sell outside of the brick and mortar. I want you to know these people outside of work, and care about them. And once you have that relationship, now we've got the emotions, we've got the endorphins, we've got everything actually mixing together. Now we have a real business relationship and a real service commitment to each other.
Yep. Clearly it's something that you live and breathe. And congratulations on everything that you and HRS are doing out there. We want to wrap up here by just sharing with everybody that first and foremost, again, Chris, thanks for joining us. This is an incredible topic that I feel like, deserves several, additional episodes. And Chris, we definitely want to have you back because there's just so much to this in terms of the way that business is going, particularly ours and yours. Yeah. We are here each week. Every Thursday afternoon, we go live at 3:00 Central. Today was 4, but we're typically 3:00 Central. And you can see next week, we've got another incredible leader as part of our Small Business Strong series. Jeremy Jones is the founder of Uncooked Chicago. This is a local raw vegan brand here in Chicago. You talk about, small business and community. Jeremy and I go back about 10 years, but we physically ran into each other down the street as I was walking to work a couple weeks ago. And I had not realized that he had started something pretty incredible here in Chicago that supports not just the local community, but Chicagoland in general. So we're going to have Jeremy at the table next week talking about his company and a lot of the things that he's doing to pour back into the community. These topics will continue to come every week, every Thursday at 3:00. You can tune in at thoughttium.com/live. We do encourage people to register for free so you can ask questions throughout. I want to thank, I want to thank our entire community for joining. I know we had a handful of friends and family that also joined today. So a big shout out and hello to a few of you who are joining us that we know and love. Want to thank our LinkedIn community for stopping by in the feed. And we're going to keep this going. These conversations light me up every week. Chris, you've been a big part of our community.
Don't stop.
We're not gonna stop. We're not gonna stop. We will be here every week on an episode by episode basis. Chris Oltmans, thanks so much for joining. We'll see everybody next week.